Good evening, everyone, and welcome to King's Church. I'm Richard Powell of Eunity Lewes, as Janet just introduced me, and I hope that this evening's talk will give the people of Lewes a chance to inform ourselves better about the challenges posed by Brexit. And now to our guest for this evening, Gavin Esler. Gavin is a Scottish journalist, television presenter, and author. He presented BBC's Newsnight for 12 years until 2014, and subsequently presented the 5 o'clock news on the BBC News channel. He stood as a Change UK candidate in London in this year's European Parliament election. Brexit Without the Bullshit is both the title of his latest book, on sale here this evening, and the theme for this evening's talk. So please welcome Gavin Esler.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Janet. I want to begin with some good news, which is you, actually. Who would have thought, if you asked yourself a couple of years ago, on a Thursday night when you could be doing something else, you would turn out to a church hall like this to listen to some bloke droning on. And I suspect you're here, as I'm here, for one reason only. You're worried about the future of this country, and so am I. Another bit of good news, however, was what Janet was saying earlier, because Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, has not lied to Her Majesty the Queen. Is there anybody here who doesn't believe him? It's just if you were prepared to lie to the Queen, you might be prepared to lie to a BBC journalist, I'm just saying. Who knows? Perhaps he was uncharacteristically telling the truth, because as we know, he has got a history of being honest. But what's interesting is that the Court of Session in Scotland has said that Her Majesty was misled. And it's also interesting that in the past few days, the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, the former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and basically the European Union 27, in different ways, they've been more polite, but they have suggested that the Prime Minister is not entirely being truthful when he suggests that he's vigorously attempting to negotiate an agreement to leave the EU. So I want to talk about something bigger than Brexit, because it's the reason I wrote the book. The normalization of lying in our public life. And it's something which there are many imports from the United States that I like. This is one that I'm not particularly keen on. And when the publisher and I, Martin, discussed the title of the book, Brexit Without the Bullshit, I thought there was a danger here if people thought you stripped away all the lies, the nonsense, the Canada plus, Norway plus. There's always a plus, isn't there? So it's whatever you want, plus a cup of coffee or a Diet Coke or something. Whatever it was that you were offered was always somehow vague, but better than you could imagine. And I thought, if you stripped away all the bullshit, would it be a book of empty pages? And it's not, because what I looked at is not the Brexit you thought you were voting for, if you voted for it. It's the Brexit that we're most likely to get. And that makes fairly somber reading, as you will have seen in the reaction to the Yellowhammer papers that were published recently. It seems to me that the biggest sin in British public life right now is actually to tell the truth. Sir Kim Darroch, an excellent diplomat, lost his job as our ambassador to Washington because he told the truth about the Trump administration, that it is fundamentally incompetent and flawed. Now, there's a surprise. You couldn't read that, in the newspapers, could you? And I thought the same about our journey towards Brexit. I didn't know what I was voting for or against in 2016, because nobody knew what Brexit would mean. Nobody explained it to us. It was never explained. It was talked about, I'm not going to go through the cliches, the easiest trade deal in history and all that kind of having your cake and eat it nonsense. But we didn't know the facts. And the normalization of lies is everywhere. It goes from Downing Street, I would suggest to you, to streets where people are out canvassing. I had 4 weeks that didn't change the world when I was a Change UK candidate in the European elections. And it was very, very interesting to talk to people in London, mostly, because I was running in London. And for instance, one example is in Argyle Street, just around the corner from Oxford Circus Tube Station. A woman about 30 came up to me and said, "I'm not going to vote for you. I'm going to vote for Nigel Farage." I said, "Oh, fine. Would you mind telling me why you're going to do that?" And she said, "Because the European Union is completely undemocratic." And I said, "So you're voting in an election for a European Parliament and someone who has been there for 20 years. Would you tell me which of the main bits of that are undemocratic?" And she said, "I hadn't quite thought of it like that." And then she walked away. And she was obviously not going to vote for me anyway. But it is very interesting how not just a couple of years of lies, but decades of lies that we read about in some of our newspapers are uncorrected and quite often unchallenged. When the book was almost ready to go out to distributors, but hadn't gone out at all, there was a review which appeared on Amazon, which I thought was quite interesting because nobody could have read the book except the publisher and myself. So I'd like to read you the review on Amazon. The headline is, "Dangerous Propaganda in an Illiterate Package." It says, "There is every chance this assembly of extremist fantasies will prove of adequate sophistication to appeal to today's rabid left-wing extremist, which is you lot. To the even slightly educated, it will appear too crass and vulgar to bear. This book is the product of a man who projects his fantasies over reality almost to the degree of psychosis." That's me. So it wasn't fake news, but it was fake reviews. And it does strike me as interesting that from some nutcase who thinks it's interesting to be anonymous on Twitter or to do something on Amazon to review a book that he couldn't possibly have read, right up to people in Parliament saying things like, on the Yellowhammer story, for example, or "this is our worst case." When it was leaked a month ago, it said it was the base case for what will happen to us. So you can believe what certain people in the government are saying or not. But facts are at the core of Enlightenment values, and the normalization of lying is part of our unenlightenment. And Boris Johnson, unfortunately, has a track record of lies. He was fired twice for lying, for making up quotes at the Times and for not telling the truth to Michael Howard's people. And now, as Prime Minister, he's telling us he wants to prorogue Parliament to get ahead with his exciting agenda on crime and the NHS. 70% of British people told Ipsos Mori they do not believe the Prime Minister. I suspect some of them are in this room who don't believe him. Philip Hammond, as I said, made it clear he doesn't believe him either. And so, as we start talking about the facts, as opposed to the fantasies, my top tip is to remember that Brexit is not an event, it is a process. If you want it over with, as I do, finished, not to talk about it, it won't happen on November the 1st if we crash out or leave with a deal on October 31st. That's when it will begin. The only way to stop talking about it for the next 5 to 10 years, which is how long trade deals will take, is to kill it. We will be arguing for years about it. So let me just go very quickly through a couple of facts that strike me as interesting. Mrs. Thatcher was an underachiever in politics because all she did was defeat the miners, neutralize trade union power, privatize state assets, including council houses, revitalize the City of London, win the Cold War, or help win the Cold War, and defeat the Argentine junta. But our Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, is rewriting the core of our foreign, trade, and economic policies at a stroke, without a mandate from the British people, with profound impacts on everything from the National Health Service to the food we eat, to the people who pick the food we eat, to the people who work in slaughterhouses, to our universities, and our reputation abroad as brainy Britain. He may also destroy the Conservative Party, which is something that some of you may bear with equanimity. Some more facts. Just on our food supplies, for example. Seasonal fruit and vegetables, as you know, in Kent, where I spend a lot of my time, mostly picked by EU 27 workers. 95% of vets in our slaughterhouses who certify our meat fit to eat are EU 27 citizens. And they may feel welcome here, or they may feel less welcome. Or they may just feel that because the pound's gone down 20%, they can go and work somewhere else. Our food standards are at risk. A lot of fuss has been made about chlorinated chicken. I've eaten chlorinated chicken. There's nothing wrong with eating chlorinated chicken. It's just a pretty crap way of bringing up chicken. If they end up with so many bugs in them, you have to chlorinate them. But that's not the really bad stuff. The US trade representative is the person who will negotiate trade deals with us, not Donald Trump. The US trade representative has been holding public hearings. You can see some of them on YouTube. You can read some of them. Ractopamine in pork is something that is in American pork, and it's regarded as so noxious, it's banned. American pork is banned in 100+ different countries, including those well-known giants of food standards, Russia and China. And of course, it's banned in the EU and it's banned in Britain. Why is this important? Maybe you don't eat pork. It's important because the US trade representative heard from the pork lobby. And in public hearings, the pork lobby said there's 60,000 pork producers in the United States, in 42 different states. That means 84 senators out of 100 will listen to us because we contribute to them and they listen to people who employ in their districts. We are saying to you, Mr. US Trade Representative, that unless Britain takes American pork, there should be no trade deal. Now, I don't care about pork particularly. It's just one of many examples. Liz Truss may think that she and our government have got a lot of negotiating skills in Washington. 84 senators are there to tell them, you haven't. Jim O'Neill, Lord O'Neill of Goldman Sachs, was asked to do an inquiry into the use of antibiotics. And he said, I quote him in the book, in US farms, antibiotics are handed out like sweets. 70% of antibiotic use in the USA is for farm animals. Boris Johnson was recently in Aberdeenshire, and he was telling farmers there, don't worry, the Americans will take our beef, but we will not have to take their beef. Does anyone believe this stuff? Anybody? And just some little things. I mean, pharmaceuticals, insulin, Viagra. Gentlemen, if you require Viagra, now would be a good time to stock up. It's all produced at Ringaskiddy, County Cork, which sounds like a great place, and I must visit it sometime. And then there's a few more little things like international driving permits, and you need at least 2 for different parts of the EU, the visa waiver system. Jean-Claude Juncker's spokeswoman says that for the British, because we will be a third country, ETIAS will apply to the UK as a third country post-Brexit. It will be €7 for a visa waiver. The difference between a visa waiver and a visa is the word waiver. Basically, you still have to apply for it. We don't have to do that now. If you go on a booze cruise, I noticed that Her Majesty's Treasury has been telling us all that we will get cheaper duty-frees. Guys, if you really want 2 bottles of wine, or whatever it was when duty-free was in with Europe, that would be great. Vote for Brexit. If you're that much of a mug. If you would prefer to take the car and the family down to Dover, go to Calais, load up in the supermarket, and fill your boots, probably best not to do Brexit. The big things that will change, the United Kingdom. I've managed for my entire life to be Scottish and British and also European. Most people in the room would be English, British and European, and some I've met earlier are from other places too. We're being asked to drop one of those, and I can promise you that in Scotland, where I've just come from Edinburgh Book Festival, many of the Scots I talked to, including many that I knew as fervent unionists in 2014, are now prepared to drop the middle bit and keep being Scottish and European. I think there will be another referendum in Scotland, whatever happens to Brexit, and I think if we crash out, Scotland will leave the United Kingdom. So Boris Johnson, head of the Conservative and Unionist Party, may lose both Northern Ireland, possibly, and also Scotland. But perhaps that doesn't worry him too much. What worries me more than anything is how our lies and incompetence, which is not true of our daily lives, it's not true of our businesses, it's not true of our professions, but it is true of our government. How those lies and incompetencies have eroded what I think is the most important thing about Britain. We're a really brainy country. Individual Cambridge colleges have got more attachment to various Nobel Prize winners than Japan and China put together. We are regarded around the world as being a problem-solving country, not a problem-creating country. So I traveled quite a bit, so let me give you a little example of how we're seen in various countries. In Germany, go to Germany quite a lot, a very sober news magazine, sort of like their equivalent of The Economist, did a profile of Jacob Rees-Mogg a few months ago and said that he could be a future British Prime Minister. And then they said, unfortunately, he is das lebende Fossil, the living fossil. In Ireland, Boris Johnson's characterization of the Irish border as being similar to that between Islington and Camden is a constant source of comedians' jokes. I mean, Islington and Camden, has he been to Derry? Has he been to Crossmaglen? I mean, in the United States, the New York Times did a portrait of the man they called Failing Grayling, the man who couldn't even organize a traffic jam at Manston and Kent. And I do ask myself, this may be a separate question, how do you get to become Chris Grayling? I mean, seriously, how do you? I don't know what you do, sir, but could you become the sort of Chris Grayling who constantly fails and then gets promoted? I think it's quite amazing. One of my favorites is a former colleague of mine who I met on a train going down to Canterbury. And he said, I'm just back from Venezuela. I said, oh no, you were in Caracas with the shooting and the Maduro, attempt to overthrow Maduro, and there were tanks on the streets, and there was tear gas, and there was rioting. He said, yeah, but that wasn't the funny bit. He said, I was on the mobile phone talking to London in English and crouching in a shop doorway, when two Venezuelans came in beside him and heard him speaking English, and one said, are you British? We hear it's really bad over there. And then, of course, there's the French government minister who named a cat Brexit because it couldn't decide whether to go out or stay in. I told my wife I was thinking of nicknaming our dog Farage because it leaves a big pile of poo behind and somebody else has to clean it up. She didn't like that. Let me just take a step back, because every November, in Cumbria, a small village called Wasdale, there's a world's biggest liar competition in a pub. And two professions are forbidden from taking part. They are lawyers. I'm sorry if anybody's a lawyer here. Some of my best friends are lawyers. And politicians. And again, actually, I've got a lot of friends who are politicians. I think it's quite unfair to most politicians, actually. Most politicians. But it's interesting that you can be disqualified from lying in a pub, but you cannot be disqualified from lying in public life. I spent a year of my life on one lie, which was, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Just in case there's anybody from the Daily Mail at the back, that wasn't me. I was quoting Bill Clinton. And he almost lost the presidency. In the 19th century, a British colonial office civil servant called Sir Henry Taylor wrote that falsehood ceases to be falsehood when it is understood on all sides that the truth is not expected to be spoken. And I thought that was perhaps one of the reasons Clinton got off. People lie about sexual relations. People lie in politics about war or national security. I think that's fine. Churchill said, in wartime, truth is so precious, she must always be guarded by a bodyguard of lies, always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. But lying has become normalized in other things too. In the United States, the Washington Post and the New York Times constantly call out the lies from the Trump White House. The most recent figures I've got are from the 12th of August, and the Post said then, they do it every 3 months in the Post, President Trump has made 12,019 false or misleading claims over 928 days, which is 13 lies a day. The man is a workaholic. And what gets me about his lies is you know he's lying because you can see it is not true. For instance, when he said most recently that a hurricane was going to hit Alabama. Wrong. Or when he said, I'm working hard in the Oval Office at Christmas, he tweeted that. He was on the golf course. And anyway, when the president is working in the Oval Office, there's a Marine Guard standing outside. You can see it, just as you can see when the Queen is in Buckingham Palace, the Royal Standard. It's like that old Chico Marx joke. Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And some people do not believe their own eyes. It's come here too, I'm afraid. 40% of Americans, however, say they still are going to vote for Donald Trump. And they may do. It's going to be a really rough campaign, and he might win again. Here, during the Brexit vote, I've got a couple of very good friends who voted for Brexit, and we've discussed it, and they're still friends. We still get on. And one of the things we've discussed is the lie on the Brexit bus. You know, everybody knows it, the 350 million a week that we give to the EU, but we didn't. That's complete. As Sir David Norgrove of the UK Statistics Authority put it, a clear misuse of official statistics. It was a lie. It was never corrected. But I think, with respect, it misses the point. Because the bit below that is the bit that worked. Let's fund our NHS instead, because that touches our hearts, whereas the other bit is a fact, a boring fact. I'm Chancellor of the University of Kent, and one of the academics there has written a book in which he, talking about Brexit, and he says, 64% of leavers thought immigration had been bad for the UK economy, 80% saw it as a burden on welfare. The facts, according to Oxford Economics, are that individual EU migrants contribute £2,300 a year more to the economy than we do if you're a British worker. Mostly because they tend to be younger, they tend not to get sick, they tend not to need some of the stuff that we do as we get older. But that's boring, isn't it? It's much better to say that you feel that migration is bad because you feel it's bad, and there's something in your life, maybe you can't get a GP appointment, maybe that's because there's immigrants taking up the space. And here's another example. In the United States, in the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton produced all kinds of facts and policy documents. Donald Trump touched the hearts of many Americans. Make America great again. Nobody can think of 4 words that summed up the Clinton campaign, except it's not going very well, perhaps. But he also told a number of falsehoods. He lied. He lied, for example, about violent crime at the time going up. And one of his very, very clever spokesmen, Newt Gingrich, who's a former Speaker of the US House of Representatives, was on television on CNN and was being interviewed about this and was told that violent crime is going down. And this is what he said. The average American this morning does not think violent crime is down. The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics that theoretically may be correct, but that's not where human beings are. People feel more threatened. I'll go with how people feel. Now that's really interesting for a number of reasons. One is, I feel the world is flat because I can walk across the stage and it feels to me absolutely flat. I know it is round, but that's a much more boring fact than the one that my daily life is about how I feel about things. And my challenge to those of you who think Brexit is going to be a factual disaster, which I think it will be, certainly if we leave with no deal, is to think about how to touch people with their feelings, the way they feel about this country. And also to take our patriotism back. I am so fed up listening to people wrapping themselves in the flag when they despise British institutions, when they, I would suspect, have lied to the Queen, when they don't respect Parliament, and when one Brexit Party MEP today said that essentially there should be political tests on judges because he doesn't like what the Scottish court did. Now, if you read the history books, there are people who've done that before, and it didn't end very well for any of us. But there is some really good news, which is that facts still work. We may have to go to Brexit to find out how fantastic it is having our cake and eating it, and then we can applaud Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Prime Minister in the manner that they would deserve. I hope we don't have to go that far. And I'm cheered by the fact that one of the things about populism is they talk a good game, the populist leaders, but they generally fail to deliver. Otto von Bismarck said that politics is the art of the possible. What we get from Boris Johnson is the art of the impossible. I'm going to build a garden bridge across the Thames. That will be £53 million. Sorry, I didn't manage to do that. We're going to build a bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland. I think that's very unlikely. We're going to build an airport on the Thames. The Thames estuary. I'm going to lie in front of bulldozers at Heathrow. But I'm not going to lie in front of Her Majesty the Queen, obviously. And the same is true of Donald Trump. He is not building the wall and getting Mexico to pay for it. He is not, unfortunately, either sorting out anything with Iran or denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. And Boris Johnson, in my view, is in deep trouble. So, what can we do? Are facts and expertise no longer important? I think they are. I think Michael Gove, rather like Newt Gingrich, is a very smart man. And he said the British people have had enough of experts. He had a point that we should listen to and reflect on, because those of you who have expertise and may use it in discussions in the family about Brexit need also to think about feelings as well as facts. What do people feel? And how have they been manipulated by some of the nastier elements in our media and our country? And to those who say, just get on with it, we haven't even agreed what it is after more than 3 years. Our institutions have been turned upside down and are under attack. And those of us who stand up for our institutions are accused of being the elite by a bunch of millionaires and squillionaires who have very, very cleverly attempted to manipulate, in my view, public opinion. So, be cheered. We can still win this. But if hard facts were everything, Spock would have been the commander of the USS Enterprise. Use the facts, but use your skill, your communication skills, to lobby your MP politely and to say, up with this, we will not put. I am very, very cheered by several things I said because there's so many people here, but I'm particularly cheered by the fact that the people doing this still don't have a clue. And I'm really cheered by the fact that Britain is better than Brexit. Thank you.